I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to talk about my projects, and also thank God that none of the other co-moderators wore the same jacket. I always hate when that happens. So I'm going to talk about two strange projects that I've been working on. One called ALS Untangled that I've been working on for about 7 years, and one called ALS Reversals that I just started. So many of you have probably heard about ALS Untangled. We started it back in 2009 within something called the ALS Research Group, the ALSRG. And we realized at that time that patients were very often going online and looking at some of the alternative therapies that were there, that were making extraordinary claims for benefit in ALS. Unfortunately, there are no internet police, so people can say whatever they want to about something they're selling on the internet and nobody holds them accountable. So our goal for this group was to develop a team of clinicians and scientists to systematically assess these things called alternative therapies and ultimately help patients and families make more informed decisions about them. We think of ourselves kind of like the X-Files, and we've got the same motto. We think the truth is out there, but it's not always easy to find. So there's 3 parts to what we do. First, where do we get our ideas? Second, how do we actually do these reviews? And then finally, how do we get the word out to folks? So we wanted to make it as easy as possible for patients and families to get ideas to us. And so we've got a lot of ways. We've got a website. We've got our emails on there. People ask me about these things in clinic. Most of our ideas come to us from patients and families via Twitter. So many of you, I think, probably know what Twitter is. But one of the nice things about Twitter is you don't have to remember anyone's email address. You can just send a tweet out into cyberspace that says, hey, ALS Untangled, I'm wondering about this clinic in Moscow that's offering electric shock therapy for ALS. And every night I mine the world for tweets that contain the word ALS Untangled. And if I see alternative therapies in there that people ask about, I put them on our website. Another nice thing about Twitter is you can get an idea of how many people are interested in what you're doing by looking at the number of people that are following you. And so I was very ecstatic this year when we crossed the 2,000 followers mark. I went home and bragged to my wife about this, and she reminded me that Lady Gaga has 33 million Twitter followers. But to be honest, she does have her own stylist, and I have to put these looks together myself. So You can also get an idea of how popular you are by how many tweets you see appearing with your name in them. And as of about 2012, we're averaging about a tweet a day, which is more than I ever thought we'd have. And as a result of all that Twitter activity, the list of things that people have asked us about has just exploded. In fact, it's now approaching 200 things that people have asked us to research. We've got so many things that we'll probably never get to all these in my lifetime. And as a result, I've put a little vote button next to each one of these things on our website. So if you have something on there that you've asked us about and you want us to look at it, be sure to go on the website and click the vote button. You don't have to pay to vote. You don't have to register to vote. All you got to do is push the button and it moves up on the list. And we've also refined the way that we do these evaluations over time. So we've always had a team. The team has now grown. There's 100 investigators now like me from across 10 countries that are participating in these reviews. We've got a real standardized operating procedure by which we go about gathering the information to construct one of these reviews. And just this past year, we actually created something called the Table of Evidence that I'm very proud of, because I don't think anyone's ever done anything quite like this before. So every time we review an alternative therapy, we ask about 5 categories. What's the mechanistic plausibility? Is there any plausible way that this could help somebody with ALS? What sort of preclinical data are there? Is there any sort of preclinical animal model that this thing has been used in, whether a cell culture model or an animal model? What do the case reports look like? Are there lots of them? Do we actually have the medical records on these people to validate that they have ALS and validate what they're saying? Are there any trials? And then finally, what do we think about the risks of this particular thing? And in each of these categories, we give grades, letter grades, ranging all the way from A to F. And then there's also a category U. And so there are very specific things that you have to achieve to move up to the next letter grade. So for example, you'd get a mechanistic plausibility grade of F if what you're saying has never been demonstrated, if we'd have to rewrite the physics books to actually explain what it is that you say you can do. For example, energy healing. So the other nice thing about a table of evidence is that it allows people that care about different types of evidence to grade these alternative therapies for themselves. So rather than have me tell you which one I think is the best, you can say, well, which category is most important to you? For a lot of my patients, risks is the most important category. So they might go on our website and they might decide for themselves which of these things I might try based on a risk grade of A. Other people with ALS don't care that much about risks. What impresses them the most is what do the case reports look like. They want to try something that other people have tried and had some sort of validated improvement on. So they might look for things that have a cases grade of A. So in 7 years now, we've completed 33 of these reviews. It doesn't sound like a lot, but they take about 40 hours to do. And we were averaging about 3 or 4 of these a year up until the past year when we've got some new support from the ALS Association that's really allowed us to kind of explode. We've doubled the number of outputs that we've had this year. So this year we've reviewed the Precision Stem Cell Clinic, we've reviewed acupuncture, a supplement called MitoQ, methylcobalamin, which is a form of injectable B12, something called Protandim, the gluten-free diet, and then most recently something from France called Endotherapia. If you want to read about these things, go onto our website and just click the name of the thing you want to read about and it will open up a free article. That's what our outputs look like. Our outputs are actually articles that have a very structured format. They're short. We try to write them in language that non-scientists can understand. And they actually get submitted to the ALS journal, the main journal in our field, where the editor reviews them, they're peer reviewed, they get published in the journal. So unfortunately, the majority of the 33 things that we've looked at over the past 7 years do not appear to be very promising. And rather than take you through each of those individually, I would like to just tell you about some red flags, some things that these more bogus therapies appear to have in common. And that way, if you see something new and it's going to be a few years before we get to it, you can ask yourself if any of these red flags appear. First of all, something that's advertised as being dramatically effective against 40 of the world's worst diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, brain tumors, ALS, fibromyalgia, diabetic neuropathy. You have to ask yourself, if this person really has something that works against all those diseases, why are they practicing in a small clinic next to a Kentucky Fried Chicken in a strip mall? They should be the most famous, wealthy person in the history of medicine. Sometimes things are just too good to be true. Anytime something's advertised as perfectly safe, that's a problem. Nothing's perfectly safe. People have side effects from placebos. Anytime there's a non-MD who's on a website making medical recommendations, that's a problem. Anytime you go someplace and they ask you to try something without any sort of informed consent, so you don't have it in writing exactly what it is that you're being asked to do, that's a problem. Anytime someone wants you to pay a whole bunch of money up front before you really know what you're getting into, that's a problem. And then the one that I think is the most reliable of all the red flags, anytime you hear about a treatment that somebody wants to sell you, and then they never want to measure anything afterward, that's a problem. Because anybody who's legitimate wants to know what happened to you after you try this thing. They don't want to just send you on your way after they collect your money. But surprisingly, some of the things that we have looked at over the past 7 years appear quite promising and might actually work. And so one of those is this thing called Lunasin. Lunasin is a soy peptide. It's taken orally, and it's got a lot of mechanisms, at least in cell cultures, that seem like they would be useful in ALS. Antioxidants, anti-inflammatory mechanisms, and alteration of something called histones. All of these are mechanisms that we've pursued in ALS trials before, so they're not completely crazy. So the mechanism grade is a C. What's the evidence that this might work? Well, there are no preclinical studies, there are no trials. But there is a pretty amazing case report out there. It's this gentleman right here. His name's on the internet, Mike Macduff. He's been in the news. He's reported that he has ALS, been diagnosed by multiple different doctors, and that a year before he started taking this stuff, he couldn't speak or swallow, and a year later, his speech and swallowing have recovered back to normal. So we found Mike Macduff, and we got his medical records, and he's right. He does appear to have ALS. He has seen some good people. He's had all the right tests. He's had all the right tests for mimics that I can think of. I have records from his ALS clinic, and his speech, swallowing, and muscle strength are all dramatically improved over the past year, which is not supposed to happen in ALS. This seems to be reasonably safe, but it is quite expensive. And so for the past couple of years since I saw this, I've been asking myself, what do I do about things like this? And now with the Ice Bucket Challenge, I finally have some resources, and I've decided to create a program to study people like Mike Macduff, people that I call ALS reversals. Now, it's important to realize that there may be multiple explanations for why somebody like this would get better. First of all, even though I have his records, he could have been misdiagnosed. There could be an ALS mimicker out there that even the best of us don't know about. Second, maybe there's something special about Mike Macduff that made him resistant to ALS, and whether he took Lunasin or not, he was going to get better. And then finally, maybe the Lunasin actually worked. And so in my new program, there's going to be two arms. One arm is called ROAR, Replication of ALS Reversals, and one arm is called STAR, Study of ALS Reversals. So the ROAR program is basically a series of small pilot trials using the exact same treatments that people who had ALS took them and got better. We're going to do the exact same thing they did. Now, sometimes people their eyes get wide when I mention this, but this, patient drug discovery is not new. There are many examples. So one of the most famous examples is Viagra. And people may not realize this, but Viagra was actually under study for heart disease. And it was only because patients, men in the study, at the end of the study came forward and said, I don't know what it's doing for my heart, but I'd like to keep taking this. That the company kind of said, what in the world is going on here? Patients discovered what that drug is currently used for, and now it's $1 billion drug. And closer to home, Nuedexta, same situation, was being studied to see if it slowed ALS progression, and it didn't. But patients came forward and said, hey, I noticed something that this drug is doing to me that I like. It's helping me with that pseudobulbar affect, and now it's FDA approved for that. So, of course, it's a long shot that one of these types of trials is going to find something useful. So, to maximize the usefulness of this program, we're going to add something to it. We're going to incorporate some novel patient-centric design features to try to target increasing enrollment and retention. And we're going to test these design features as well. So Michael was hinting at this a couple minutes ago. One of the most perplexing things to me in 15 years and 2,000 patients worth of experience is that less than 10% of people with ALS enroll in clinical trials. It's pretty shocking. So why is that? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons, which I'm not going to go into all of them today, but I will tell you about 4 of them that I've heard over and over again. First of all, people tell me we can't find a trial that we qualify for. All of your trials have very narrow exclusion criteria. You have to have so much ALS, but not too much, and you can't have this attached to you or that. Why do we do that? Well, we're trying to really homogenize the populations that come into these studies, because most studies are looking for very small effects in a very noisy disease. Typically, we're looking for a 10% slowing in the rate of decline in the ALS functional rating scale. It's a pretty small signal in a disease that's quite noisy. So what are we going to do different? We're looking for the biggest signal that's ever been looked for. We're looking for people to get better. And if they don't get better, we're going to consider our trial to have failed. And what that means is that we can take anybody into the study. Doesn't matter how long you've had ALS, it doesn't matter how sick you are, what you've got attached to you. Now realize, of course, that the chances of this working are quite low, and that we might actually reject something that has a small positive benefit. But that's the risk we're going to take. Second thing I've heard over and over again, people with ALS, they don't like coming into trials where there's a placebo. There's no getting around a placebo when you're trying to figure out for sure that something works. But when you're doing pilot trials, the first ever attempt to see if something might work, there's no reason why you can't use matched historical controls now. We have so many databases. We can match people according to things that determine how fast they progress and get a rough idea of whether something's promising enough to take into a more traditionally designed study. Plus, if you think about it, if I do this study and 20 people have an ALS reversal like Mike Macduff, do I really need to do a phase 3 placebo-controlled trial? Probably not. Again, a real long shot, but just saying. Next, people don't like the burdens of trials. So, the trials, they typically require lots of visits, long days, lots of trips back and forth to the clinic, and you have to be in the study for a long time. And, that gets harder as a person with ALS gets sicker. So in this program, most of the visits that we ask patients to make are going to be made in their own living room through their own home computer. We're going to teach them how to use a website called Patients Like Me, and we're going to teach them how to measure things in themselves, like the ALS functional rating scale. And periodically, we're going to check in on them by phone to make sure that they're actually doing what we ask them to do. And then finally, one of the things I've heard over and over again from patients is how frustrating it is to come into a trial and realize you were one of the first ones in. And by the time that trial finishes enrolling all of its subjects, and by the time the last subject finishes the entire trial, and by the time the results are published, it might be a year and a half or 2 years later. That's a long time in the lifespan of a patient with ALS. So one of the nice things about this new program, since it's on Patients Like Me, you'll be able to follow along in real time. You can check in anytime you want and see what's happening with the Duke Rohr Lunasin study. So again, this is a very novel design, widely inclusive, largely virtual, single center, open label pilot study using historical controls. We're going to bring 50 people in. Why did we pick 50? It's based on a power calculation, which I won't go into. I'm not going to tell you about all these inclusion criteria, but just a quick glance at these will show you that there are no disease duration criteria. There are no criteria based on disease severity, no criteria based on what you have attached to you. Of course, you have to have ALS. Of course, you have to be able to use a computer, and you can't be on a lot of other experimental therapies or have had a bad reaction to Lunasin. So this is a year-long study, but there's only 3 visits required to Duke. During those visits, we're going to confirm that you have ALS. We're going to teach you how to use Patients Like Me, teach you how to measure your ALS FRS and your weight. We're also going to do blood tests because we want to look at a biomarker. We want to see if Lunasin is actually doing anything that the company says it can do in people. So we're going to measure histone acetylation. We're going to ask you to check in once a month on Patients Like Me, and we'll be looking over your shoulder for the first few months to make sure that you're doing it and not having any problems, and my coordinator will be calling you periodically to check. So that's the ROAR program. The other program is the STAR program, and this is an attempt to understand why these reversals might be happening. And again, the 2 hypotheses, other than the fact that it might be a treatment that's working, maybe it's an ALS mimic that we don't know about, or maybe some of these folks have something different about them that makes them resistant to ALS. So what are we going to do here? Well, first we're going to try to survey colleagues around the world and identify as many ALS reversals as we possibly can. I already have 22 in my desk. I'd like to get 100. I'm going to put them all in the same database for the first time, make sure that the records are compatible with an ALS diagnosis, see what these folks might share in common as far as past medical history or concomitant medications. We're going to try to get blood samples on these folks and look for antibody-mediated ALS mimics, and we're going to look at their blood for whole exome sequencing. Now again, this might sound like science fiction to you, but there's a precedent from another disease group. Within HIV, there are a group of people called elite controllers that seem to be resistant to the disease. They get infected with the virus, but they never get sick, and they never take any medicine. And for years, people just shrugged their shoulders like they did with these ALS reversals. Finally, somebody put them in the same database and did whole exome sequencing and found that a lot of these folks have the same polymorphism. It's an abnormality in a gene called CCR5. CCR5 is a protein that's in all of our cells that it turns out HIV needs to get in. We didn't know about that before we studied these people. And furthermore, Pfizer used that knowledge to develop a drug to block that receptor, which works for everybody with HIV. So maybe we can have a similar success by studying these ALS reversals. More information is available on several websites, ALS Untangled, the Duke ALS Clinic, and ALS Reversals. And I just want to thank especially patients. You're the inspiration and the driving force behind these projects, the funding sources, ALSA, the MNDA, and the Larry Vance Hughes ALS Foundation, and the smart people that I work with at Patients Like Me, Mass General Hospital, and Duke. Thank you very much.
This is a question for the last presenter. One of the other obstacles that people find when looking for alternative medicines that I would like to add is language. Do you have all this information in any other languages?
It's a great point. We don't at this time. So if you have an idea for how we could do that in a cost-effective way, I would be all ears. Yeah, that's what it always comes down to. I mean, you know, Google Translate works pretty well for these types of articles, but if you have any other ideas, I'm all open to them. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
This question is for the reversal of ALS. Are you looking for patients who have completely reversed or even just improved?
Could you just repeat that question for me?
An
The
improvement versus just,
reversal
yeah.
should be complete or could be just partial improvement.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been trying to figure out how to operationally define an ALS reversal. You know, obviously Mike Macduff is an ALS reversal, right? He's so much better. So I'm actually going to be presenting in a couple of days here at this meeting an idea that I have for how to define it. And it's based on an analysis of a giant database that I did. The database is called PROACT. It's got over 8,000 patients in it. And so it looks to me like a nice cutoff point might be to define it by a 4 or more point improvement in the ALS functional rating scale that lasts at least 1 year. Now, why did I pick that? I picked that because, first of all, small little reversals that last for a short period of time are actually not that uncommon. About 50% of the people in the PROACT database had a period where they improved by a point that lasted 60 days. So we have this idea in our mind that ALS is just a straight line down when you get it. And it's not like that at all. There's periods where it's flat. There's periods where it bumps up a little. There's periods where it goes down faster. I want to pick something that's robust enough to be biologically important, but it's also got to be common enough that I can study. You know, I can't just do a whole project based on 22 people. That's not enough people to do any kind of decent analysis. So I'm going to need probably at least 100. So I think with that definition, I might be able to get that many.
And do they have to have alternative therapy only or any kind of like stem cell?
Oh no, this is two completely different programs. So they're overlapping, but the ALS alternative program, the ALS Untangled, that's a program to help people understand alternative therapies. The reversals program is to try to understand why do people with ALS sometimes get better. So those people who have the ALS reversals that I'm looking for, I don't care what they took. It doesn't matter. I just want to see if they got better, I want to know about them.
Even with a stem cell?
Anything. Yeah, anybody
I'm
out
the
there.
one.
Send me an email. Send me an email. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a question here, I think, from our listeners.
How far away are we from receiving new treatments? And from another listener, why hasn't there been any sort of new treatment for such a long time?
I can start with one thing. I mean, so
Oh, I think we need to repeat the question. There are two questions here. One is, how close are we to a new treatment, and why has it taken so long before we actually have another treatment?
So I think, first of all, I'll take the second part of the question. You know, new treatments in ALS come around all the time. It just depends how you define a new treatment. Like, I'm pretty excited about Nuedexta, first of all, for the pseudobulbar affect component of it. That's a symptom that I did not have much luck with for many years. And just recently, just last month, we learned that there's been another trial of Nuedexta that's actually shown benefit in helping people with speech and swallowing. So now I'm starting to use a lot more Nuedexta just over the past month in my clinic because the trial shows that it can help some people with their speech and swallowing. So I think new treatments are coming around all the time. It's just a matter of we don't have the disease-modifying treatment that we all want that stops or reverses ALS yet. We have symptomatic therapies right now.
It's extreme mental and physical, caused by extreme physical or mental or both stress. And all the genetic variations, and they all down to the coping mechanism. So my question is, in your clinic, how many people every month coming in with symptom onset, and what do you do about it? Any one of you.
So,
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What do you mean by symptom onset? Yeah.
So if person come in and say, I may have ALS,
Oh.
doctor, look at me, what do I
Yeah.
have?
Well, I mean, we probably see we see 3 new rule out ALS patients every week, and about 17 return patients every week. And, the thing about the places where all three of us practice, they're all academic centers. So usually they've already seen other doctors before they come to us. So, a person who comes to see me with a diagnosis of ALS that doesn't have it is pretty rare. It happens maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
So can you,
I think there's pros and cons to, to both approaches. I mean, so the mesenchymal stem cells, they're your own cells. So the nice thing is you don't have to be immunosuppressed. But the downside is they're your own cells. So if there's something genetically wrong with all your cells that contributed to getting ALS in the first place, you're just getting those cells back. And modifying them might help for a little while, but there might be a better way. And then you've got the flip side where you do somebody else's cells, embryonic stem cells, for example. There you've got to be immunosuppressed. So there's no perfect solution
Together
yet.
from 2 different virtual listeners. The first is, does edaravone, also known as Radicut, slow the progression of disease? And another one from someone living with ALS that has taken a look at the Deanna protocol and would like some comments on that from the panel.
Sure. Yeah, so, with regard to the first one, edaravone, so this was presented at the American Academy of Neurology, but the paper, to my knowledge, has not been published yet. We've been looking for this paper. And so until the paper comes out, I'm not going to have much to say about it. That's one of the things I learned in my years at the helm of ALS Untangled is you need the information in front of you before you really should say anything. And, when it comes to the Deanna protocol, that is something that we've reviewed. And so just so people have a framework on this, this is a collection of supplements that were put together by an orthopedic surgeon whose daughter was reportedly diagnosed with ALS, and he was trying to find something to help her. And, his report was that her progression slowed on this. And so when we reviewed this, of course, we reached out to him, we reached out to her, we asked for records. They did not send her records, so we can't confirm that she has ALS or that her progression has been slowed. And in fact, I'll say I've yet to find a single person that I'm convinced had their progression slowed by the Deanna protocol. It gets a mechanism that's plausible because it's a number of supplements that do different things that could be involved in the biology of ALS, but there is at this time an animal study that's highly flawed, that's never been replicated, and there really is no interpretable human data that's come out on that. So when my patients ask about it, I just tell them I don't think it's all that promising at this time. I think if there was something there, we would have seen some people that you could actually point to and say, look at the difference in their progression before and after the Deanna protocol. We don't have that. So
if each of you might be willing to say what you think might be the most promising line of research or lines of research to find treatment or a cure.
starting on this side. So I'm super excited about my Als Reversals project, but to be honest, what I think is most likely to work in the next few years is the antisense oligonucleotide stuff. So the nice thing about that is that we've got a defined subtype of ALS that we're trying to treat with those, where we know exactly what caused it. We know exactly how these drugs work. And I think those might actually give us the ability to stop the progression of ALS in its tracks in those people that have those genetic mutations. So we'll see.